On today's Music Nerd, my response to your response to my response to much of the response to Emily White's blog post on NPR's All Songs Considered blog a couple of weeks ago. Music Nerd! Last week on Music Nerd, I defended Emily White, an intern for NPR's All Songs Considered, who wrote a blog post in which she admitted that despite having a music library of over 11,000 songs, she's only ever paid for about 15 albums worth of it. To watch that episode, you can click the link in the description or save a couple inches of mouse movement by clicking right here. But you all seem to have definite opinions on stealing music, so I figured why not keep this conversation going. I'm going to take the opportunity now to respond to some of your more intelligent counter-arguments. So leading things off is a comment from The Rabid Possum, who says, "What I think should happen is illegal downloading should be a federal offense. If it's subject to thousands of dollars in fines and or imprisonment, who would distribute it online?" The Rabid Possum, I mean, yeah, that would work, but how on earth would that ever be enforced? The only way to know if someone has been sharing files would be to monitor their browsing history, their emails, their Skype logs, to monitor their private channels of communication on a downright unconstitutional level. Allowing the government to do that would be a gross infringement of individual civil liberties and would open the door to all kinds of nightmarish Orwellian scenarios. All right, next comment I want to respond to comes from Sans the Seth, who appears to be a musician himself. He says, "We have to frequently deal with things like our vans breaking down, equipment repairs, etc. Record companies can only do so much when it comes to all of that. The rest comes straight from the band's pockets. Sure, it's nice for people to hear the music, but it's also nice to be able to afford living." Seth, there's nothing new about vans breaking down and equipment needing repairs, in much the same way that there's nothing new about the music industry being in a constant state of flux, and therefore being a tough nut to crack. I mean, I wish that every single independent artist could make it, but that has never been the case, and it never will be. At least, not until the technological singularity brings on a technotopic world state where sentient computers and robots perform all utilitarian tasks for human beings, allowing us to focus exclusively on artistic endeavors. But that won't happen for at least another 20 years. With any given evolution, some artists will adapt and thrive, while others will fade into obscurity. I mean, I'm not arguing that the piracy paradigm is the correct paradigm for us to be transitioning into, because that's not the right way to be looking at it. We don't have any more control over new media paradigms than we do the weather. And I mean, someday we will control the weather. We'll just have to deploy a fleet of billions of nanobots into the upper atmosphere to deflect and or magnify the sun's rays, but I digress. Again, technotopic world state. We don't create new media paradigms. New media paradigms simply happen to us. I'm not saying that piracy should exist any more than I'm saying that hurricanes should exist. They're just a fact of life. So you can either sit on your hands and refuse to accept the new reality, or you can board up your metaphorical musical house. Next up, we have New York Lily, who says, "Making music is not easy, especially for independent artists who might not have a record company. I don't refuse to pay for food, so I won't refuse to pay for something just as essential, like music. Artists should be paid for their work." You don't refuse to pay for food now, but if tomorrow someone invented a machine that reliably could take nutrients out of thin air and turn them into delicious steak dinners, I don't think you'd complain that ConAgra was suddenly out of business. If you personally still pay for music in order to support artists, that's great, more power to you. But I don't think it's reasonable to expect the casual musical consumer to continue indefinitely paying for something that can now just be plucked out of thin air. Guilt is not an effective business model. The artists who go on to define the 21st century are going to have to come up with something more creative. Next up, we have Rockin' Ryan 20, who says, "Music will always be around, but without people funding the artists who create it, there will be less and less musicians who can dedicate their life to perfecting their craft and creating music." Rockin' Ryan, I see where your concern is coming from, but I think it's a little bit overstated. I mean, yes, it's true, fewer and fewer artists will be able to finance their work through album sales, but as album sales continue to decline, other monetization options continue to rise. Streaming services like Spotify are only going to get better and better at turning a profit, and Harry Roberts left an interesting comment with a few more ideas. He said, "Alternative methods of providing an incentive for musicians to create great albums has to exist. I can see 3 different ways of achieving this, either through artists being contracted to produce work by companies, least favorite, through programs like Kickstarter, or by communism, personal favorite." Now, I don't know about communism, but I do think that Kickstarter might just fix everything. Maybe. It's possible. like a 60% chance. Kickstarter works wonderfully for artists that already have an established following. Rather than recording an album and then recouping the cost involved with recording an album by selling that album back to fans, fans are beginning to pay for an album to be produced up front, knowing that they'll be able to listen to it for free later. The challenge of a Kickstarter-based model, though, is initially building an audience. But that's not so different from the way things have always been. And today, with tools like YouTube and Spotify, there are more tools than ever to connect your music with brand new earballs. It's like an eyeball, but in your ear.
I don't know if that's medically accurate.
I'm pretty sure that's medically accurate. So there you have it, my response to some of your responses to my response to the general response to Emily White's NPR blog post. But there's no reason to end this discussion now. I think that this is the most important discussion happening in the world of music in 2012. So post a comment or a video response and let's keep it going. To watch me covering the 3rd annual VidCon in Anaheim, California from last week, click right here. To watch the Rap Report with Esteban, click here. And to watch Happy Fun Music Time with Elaine, click right over here. And subscribe to Fuse.